Some films feel less like they were made for the world, and more like the world stumbled into them by accident. Near Dark is one of those rare creations born not from industry trends or studio confidence, but from stubborn vision and creative survival. It occupies a space that shouldn't logically exist. Part highway nightmare, part broken love story, part outlaw western, drifting through the remains of the American night. Kathryn Bigelow shaped it with an intensity that cuts through every frame, giving the film a sense of isolation so palpable it feels carved from desert air and sleepless hours. This wasn't a story polished for comfort. It was assembled from compromises, battles, and choices made under the pressure of limited resources and relentless conditions. The cast found themselves pushed to physical and emotional boundaries, improvising moments that would become legendary while navigating nights that blurred together into a haze of exhaustion. What emerged was a film that didn't resemble anything surrounding it, too feral to be mainstream, too intimate to be dismissed, too haunted to fit neatly inside any one genre. Years after its quiet release, Near Dark has gathered the kind of cult devotion that grows only around stories discovered rather than marketed. Its imagery lingers, its violence feels lived in, its silence speaks louder than many films' dialogue. And beneath all of it lies a history of creative risks, accidental discoveries, and unspoken tension that shaped the film into a strange, enduring artifact of cinema's darker corners. These are 20 weird facts you didn't know about Near Dark, 1987. Fact 1. Near Dark began as a film that wasn't supposed to exist in the form we know. Kathryn Bigelow initially set out to create a modern western, a genre studios considered unmarketable and commercially barren. Every pitch meeting hit the same brick wall. Westerns were dead, they said. So she improvised a solution. She reshaped her vision into a vampire story just to get the project approved. But instead of abandoning the Western spirit, she embedded it into the bones of the film. The dust, the wandering, the moral desolation, all of it remained, now wrapped in a nocturnal layer of hunger and violence. The blending of genres confused the crew from the first days of shooting. Some believed they were making a stripped-down horror piece. Others thought it was a grim romance. No one could identify the project's true shape, and Bigelow intentionally kept answers vague. She wanted a world where labels didn't apply, where atmosphere dictated emotion more than plot devices or tropes. Strangely, the Western influence the studio tried to suppress became the film's lifeblood. By disguising her intentions, Bigelow created a hybrid that defied convention, lean, dangerous, and quietly revolutionary. Near Dark exists because a director refused to let a genre die quietly. Fact 2. The casting of Near Dark wasn't just strategic, it was instinctive. Kathryn Bigelow recruited Lance Henriksen, Bill Paxton, and Jeanette Goldstein directly from the momentum of Aliens, trusting their shared rhythm and their ability to throw themselves into physically grueling roles. These were performers who thrived in chaos, who didn't flinch at long nights, who understood ensemble dynamics through exhaustion and pressure. James Cameron vouched for them wholeheartedly, calling them fearless and built for unpredictable shoots. Henriksen immersed himself in his role with unsettling dedication. He crafted elaborate histories for his character, adjusted his wardrobe with his own hands, and carried props meant to ground him in centuries of imagined memory. Goldstein brought a chilling quietness, radiating danger without needing to raise her voice. And Paxton became the film's wildfire, crafting a character defined not by the script but by instinct, energy, and physicality. Their chemistry felt less like acting and more like a dysfunctional clan forged by survival. It gave the film a raw authenticity impossible to fabricate. They didn't just play predators, they inhabited a world that required them to become something feral, volatile, and disturbingly committed. Fact 3. Shifting the entire production into the nocturnal world wasn't just a stylistic choice, it reshaped everyone involved. With most scenes set at night, the cast and crew found themselves living in reverse. Sunrise became the end of the workday. Meals happened in strange, mismatched hours. Conversations blurred as exhaustion settled deep into their bones. Kathryn Bigelow believed this inversion was essential. Vampires weren't creatures of the day, and she wanted the actors to feel the same displacement. The desert environment heightened everything. Nights dropped into freezing temperatures, forcing actors to deliver intense performances while battling shivers beneath thin costumes. Makeup applied under scorching lamps cracked as soon as the wind hit it. Lights flickered unpredictably. Generators groaned. Equipment behaved as if the environment itself rejected artificial intrusion. Fatigue played tricks on perception. crew members mentioned seeing shapes at the edges of the set, shadows shifting without a source, or figures that vanished when approached. Whether caused by sleeplessness or atmosphere, these impressions leaked into the performances. The actors looked haunted not by direction, but by the physical reality of living inside night after night after night. Near Dark didn't imitate the nocturnal life, its production lived it. And that lived experience left an imprint that flickers through every frame. Fact 4. The struggle to market Near Dark became as complicated as making the film itself. When executives saw the finished cut, they found themselves holding a movie that didn't align with any category they knew how to sell. It lacked the theatrical flash of mainstream horror, avoided the melodrama of romance, and carried the dust and blood sensibility of a Western something the marketing team considered a commercial risk. Their solution was to pivot the film toward a younger demographic, reshaping the promotional materials into something that echoed popular vampire trends of the era. They redesigned the poster with bright tones, softened imagery, and a misleading suggestion of supernatural glamour. Nothing about it resembled the film's harsh nocturnal energy. Audiences were lured in expecting a glossy thrill ride, and instead found a grim, melancholy story about drifting outsiders. The mismatch led to confusion, lukewarm word of mouth, and frustrated viewers who felt baited into a different experience. Bigelow pushed back, but her influence couldn't override the studio's insistence. Ironically, the marketing failure became part of the film's mystique. People later sought it out precisely because it didn't resemble what its own posters promised. The misbranding became the first clue that Near Dark had a hidden identity waiting to be discovered, one that couldn't be packaged neatly for the mainstream. Fact 5. Working on Near Dark meant embracing a filmmaking environment where safety and certainty often gave way to improvisation and endurance. The low budget forced the crew to craft set pieces from whatever they could cobble together, and nowhere was this more apparent than in the bar massacre scene. Without extensive effects, rigs, or stunt redundancies, the team relied on physical timing, breakable props, and instinct. Chairs splintered unpredictably. Shards of glass traveled farther than expected. Performers navigated shifting debris with only a split second to adjust. Vehicles for chase sequences fared no better. Many were borrowed, repaired hurriedly, or coaxed into running long enough for a single take. Lighting setups were equally makeshift, constructed from repurposed metal sheets, salvaged reflectors, and improvised rigs designed to stretch the limited equipment as far as possible. When something broke, and it often did, the scene had to adapt in real time. Yet this pressure forged scenes with an unmistakable grit. The tension on screen wasn't the product of choreography, but of actors responding to a chaotic environment. The rough edges, the uneven shadows, the unpredictable movement, all of it lent the film a sense of urgency that couldn't be replicated in controlled conditions. The world of Near Dark feels dangerous because the set frequently was. Fact 6. Improvisation shaped Near Dark not as an artistic luxury, but as the tool that kept the production moving. The desert winds, sporadic temperature swings, and limited night hours made rigid planning impossible. Kathryn Bigelow embraced this unpredictability, encouraging the actors to interact with the environment and each other in ways that felt instinctual. The result was a world where scenes unfolded with an animal-like responsiveness, mirroring the characters' nomadic lives. Bill Paxton thrived within this freedom. His portrayal of Severin emerged from spontaneous gestures, tilted grins, sudden lunges, erratic shifts in posture that gave the character an aura of unrestrained menace. His castmates never knew when he would veer into a new line or movement, which added tension to every interaction. Henriksen balanced Paxton's volatility with a sinister stillness, grounding the group dynamic. Goldstein contributed a predatory quiet, blending seamlessly into the unpredictable rhythm. One of the film's most haunting sequences resulted from weather interference. A powerful gust ruined the planned dialogue, leaving the sound unusable. Instead of abandoning the moment, Bigelow reshaped it into a silent tableau illuminated by passing headlights. The scene's hypnotic, drifting quality came directly from letting nature rewrite the moment. Improvisation didn't just influence the performances, it became the film's pulse. The vampires feel untamed because the actors were responding to a world that refused to stay still. Fact 7. The vampires of Near Dark look nothing like the polished immortals that defined earlier horror eras. Kathryn Bigelow wanted creatures who carried the scars of their environment rather than the elegance of myth. She instructed the makeup team to study people who spent most of their lives exposed to brutal sunlight farmhands, long-haul drivers, drifters whose skin bore years of heat and wind. They translated those real-world textures into layered makeup, blistered tones, cracked surfaces, and the suggestion of skin cooked repeatedly by ultraviolet exposure. Under different lighting conditions, the effect transformed dramatically. Under softer sources, the makeup seemed subtle, almost human. Under the harsher night gels, however, every line deepened, giving the characters the appearance of being slowly disintegrating. Bigelow insisted that these wounds remain visible throughout the film's timeline. No magical recovery, no convenient continuity resets. The vampires carried their injuries like badges of a long, violent existence. Some crew members occasionally mistook the makeup for real trauma, and early audiences even speculated whether the actors had suffered burn. By avoiding theatrical design, the film achieved something far more unnerving: monsters whose bodies reflected the punishment of the world they inhabited. Fact 8. Bill Paxton's performance as Severin stands as one of the most chaotic, unforgettable elements of Near Dark, but the character emerged from instinct rather than rehearsed technique. Paxton approached the role with the intention of making Severin feel predatory on a visceral level. He studied the behavior of animals known for taunting their prey movements that alternated between deceptive calm and explosive violence. He translated those rhythms into sharp tilts of the head, sudden shifts of balance, and a grin that read as a threat even before he spoke. His spontaneity extended far beyond physicality. Paxton regularly introduced unscripted lines and gestures, forcing his co-stars to react authentically in each moment. This gave Severin an unpredictable presence that even the cast felt unsettled by. Henriksen's controlled stillness and Goldstein's quiet menace provided the perfect counterpoints to his volatility, shaping the vampire clan into a unit that felt organically dysfunctional. The bar sequence offered Paxton the freedom to unleash the full extent of his interpretation. His blood-smeared smile and improvised taunts were creations of the moment, captured without rehearsal. Bigelow recognized that Severin's power came from Paxton's instinct, and she allowed him to push the boundary of every scene. Severin endures not because he was written brilliantly, but because Paxton embodied him without restraint. Fact 9. Some of the props used in Near Dark carried histories far more unsettling than any fiction. When the production outgrew its limited budget, the art department sought inexpensive ways to enrich the visual texture of the film. A local contact at a law enforcement facility offered access to a collection of confiscated items, many of which had been involved in unresolved investigations. The crew chose pieces based on wear and authenticity, never anticipating the psychological weight they would bring. One item, a warped suitcase with deep scorched marks along its surface, immediately caught Bigelow's attention. It had been part of a drug lab seizure, its metal components still tinged with chemical residue. Another object, a motel lamp that had survived an arson-related incident, cast an eerie, uneven glow whenever it flickered on. Crew members occasionally remarked that the lamp made them feel strangely observed, though no one voiced it loudly. These objects were never meant to draw focus, yet they grounded the vampire clan's world in a gritty realism no fabricated props could match. They carried traces of real crime, real desperation, real darkness, and in a story defined by lives lived on the margins, their presence added an unsettling authenticity. Fact 10. What unsettled censors about Near Dark wasn't its blood, it was its quiet cruelty. The bar sequence, now infamous for its raw brutality, was filmed without the usual stylistic armor that softens on-screen violence. There's no dramatic swell, no theatrical staging, no comforting separation between viewer and horror. The attacks unfold with a matter-of-fact detachment, as though the characters have done this countless times. It's that emotional coldness, that unnerving efficiency, that caused ratings boards in several countries to sound the alarm. Some censors describe the violence as psychologically corrosive, reacting more to the tone than the imagery. A few countries demanded edits, worried that the scene's lack of moral commentary made it too bleak for general audiences. Studio executives pushed for changes, fearing distribution problems, but Kathryn Bigelow refused to dilute the moment. To her, the bar scene revealed the vampire clan for what they truly were: creatures who dismantled their surroundings without fanfare, without mercy, without spectacle. Critics eventually praised the sequence as a breakthrough in genre filmmaking. What frightened censors became a defining example of how horror can unsettle without exaggeration. It wasn't gore that made the scene memorable, it was the honesty of the violence. Fact 11. Behind the scenes, Near Dark weathered a series of creative clashes that shaped its final identity. Producers expected a horror film with clear motivations, digestible mythology, and emotional guideposts that mainstream audiences could follow. Kathryn Bigelow envisioned something quieter and more instinctive: characters revealed through action rather than dialogue, a world that offered atmosphere instead of explanation, and a narrative that trusted viewers to fill in the gaps. These opposing visions collided during editing. Executives pushed for additional context, suggesting narration or extra dialogue to clarify character arcs. Bigelow pushed back, insisting that too much explanation would drain the film of its unsettling mystery. She believed the vampires should feel ancient, unknowable, and emotionally opaque figures who existed outside the rules of human storytelling. The climax became the final point of contention. Producers wanted a more satisfying, triumphant conclusion. Bigelow argued for restraint, maintaining that the film's emotional power came from its fragility rather than resolution. Her stance prevailed. The ending remained quiet, uncertain, and haunting precisely the tone she intended. The battles never made it into the final credits, but their influence shaped every shadow and silence in the film. Fact 12. The production's commitment to nighttime filming reshaped the cast and crew's internal clock until they felt like inhabitants of another world. Working exclusively after sundown meant sleep became fragmented, meals lost their order, and exhaustion fed into each day like a slow-moving fog. People arrived on set looking hollow-eyed, their tempers dulled not by irritation but by a kind of drifting disorientation. Kathryn Bigelow believed this state was invaluable. It mirrored the emotional dislocation of the characters themselves. The desert's temperament made everything harder. Nights that looked calm suddenly erupted in sharp winds that rattled light stands and drowned out audio. Temperatures plummeted, leaving actors to push through scenes with trembling hands and visible breath. Makeup cracked under the cold and had to be reapplied constantly. Equipment malfunctioned without warning, lenses fogged, batteries drained, and generators flickered unpredictably. Crew members later admitted that the fatigue occasionally played tricks on their perception. Some described fleeting movements at the edges of the set, shadows shifting in ways they couldn't explain, or distant noises that seemed out of place. Whether illusions or atmosphere, those impressions seeped into the film's performances. The characters' weary stares and unsteady pauses weren't rehearsed. They were the honest results of living inside a world that no longer obeyed daylight. Near Dark didn't portray the toll of nocturnal life. It embodied it. Fact 13. The visual world of Near Dark owes much to the way its lighting cuts through darkness like a blade rather than a blanket. Kathryn Bigelow and cinematographer Adam Greenberg rejected the smooth, cool-toned style common in 1982 night scenes. Instead, they assembled a harsher palette built from industrial light sources, sodium vapor, mercury lamps, and improvised halogen rigs filtered through whatever materials they could find on location. The result was a nocturnal environment that looked metallic, brittle, and confrontational. Because the desert offered almost no natural reflection, the crew resorted to unconventional solutions. They salvaged sheets of aluminum, rusted metal scraps, and broken signage panels to bounce light unpredictably across the actors' faces. The reflections were uneven, fractured, and sometimes unsettling, which thrilled Bigelow. She wanted the night to feel alive, like something with a mind of its own. The highway sequences showcase this philosophy most vividly. As vehicles pass, their headlights carve fleeting glimpses of the characters, sharp, momentary, and then gone, creating the impression that the audience is witnessing something not meant to be seen for long. That flickering exposure became one of the movie's defining signatures. What looks like a bold stylistic invention was, in truth, born from limitation, but those limitations produced a visual identity so distinctive that later films echoed its aesthetic without knowing the engineering it required. Fact 14. The burning cabin sequence remains one of the film's most searing images, but filming it teetered on the edge of catastrophe. The structure had been treated to ignite quickly, yet no one anticipated how violently it would catch once the flames took hold. Within seconds, the fire roared high enough to force crew members to scramble backward, the heat punching through the night air with startling intensity. For Jeanette Goldstein, the moment was especially harrowing. Encased in restrictive makeup and layered wardrobe, she felt the temperature surge against her skin with frightening immediacy. Lance Henriksen recognized her tension and stayed close, steadying her, while Kathryn Bigelow rapidly adjusted the scene's blocking to keep the actors safe without sacrificing the dramatic weight of the sequence. Cinematographer Adam Greenberg acted on instinct, rolling multiple cameras at once to capture whatever they could before the structure collapsed. The resulting footage, silhouettes moving against an uncontrolled blaze, became some of the film's most unforgettable imagery. The near accident prompted a temporary halt in shooting as the team reassessed safety protocols. Some questioned the risks taken. Others believed the moment captured a raw emotional truth impossible to manufacture. Either way, the fear visible in that scene carries an authenticity that only real danger can produce. Fact 15. The sonic landscape of Near Dark drifts between melancholy and menace, shaped largely by Tangerine Dream's ethereal electronic score. Their music gives the film an otherworldly sense of drift, a tone that feels detached, yet emotionally charged. But not every piece they composed survived the editing process. One track, designed to underscore a quiet exchange between Caleb and May, was removed despite its haunting beauty. The cue carried a slow, aching melody that might have softened the film's emotional austerity. Producers favored it, believing it offered a moment of warmth the story otherwise resisted. But Kathryn Bigelow felt the music leaned too heavily into sentiment. She believed the scene should communicate unease and ambiguity rather than tenderness. After lengthy debate, Bigelow chose absence over adornment. Without the music, the moment takes on a fragile stillness, an emotional pause that refuses to offer comfort. The unused composition later circulated among collectors, sparking discussions about how it might have reshaped the film's tone. But the silence in the final cut speaks more powerfully than any melody could. It mirrors the characters' internal fractures, letting the audience feel the uncertainty the score would have softened. Fact 16. There was once a moment in Near Dark that lived only in early cuts, a quiet, unnerving glimpse that could have reshaped how viewers interpreted Caleb's descent. In this removed sequence, he stands before a motel mirror, bracing for the absence of a reflection. Instead, something stranger appears, a faint, warped image of himself, marked by subtle scorch, like patterns creeping across his skin. It suggested that vampirism wasn't a sudden transformation, but a slow internal corrosion, a change the body tried and failed to hide. Test viewers reacted with confusion. Some believed the warped reflection was a technical error. Others thought it introduced symbolism too abstract for a film grounded in physical grit. Producers argued that the scene disrupted the narrative flow and might distract audiences with questions the movie wasn't designed to answer. Kathryn Bigelow initially defended the moment, drawn to its fragile terror, but eventually removed it to preserve the film's pacing. Crew members who saw the footage remembered it vividly. Caleb staring into a version of himself already being rewritten by something he couldn't escape. Without that scene, the film moves faster, but it loses a haunting beat of self-recognition that would have deepened the tragedy. Some scenes vanish because they're unnecessary. Others vanish because they reveal too much truth. Fact 17. Critics in 1987 didn't quite know what to do with Near Dark. It arrived in a cinematic landscape filled with stylized vampire fantasies and crowd-pleasing horror trends. Instead of glamour or myth, Kathryn Bigelow delivered something stripped down, mournful, and unsettling, a film that traded spectacle for silence and emotional clarity for atmospheric weight. Some reviewers admired its uncompromising mood, calling it a bleak poem of the American night. Others struggled with its refusal to offer neat motivations or genre cues. What critics did agree on was the power of the performances. Bill Paxton's feral charisma stood out as a force of nature, dangerous, magnetic, and impossible to predict. Lance Henriksen's quiet intensity gave the film an ancient, weary gravitas. Jeanette Goldstein's cold restraint added a layer of predatory calm that unsettled even seasoned horror critics. Together, they grounded the film with a realism that felt bruised and lived in. Yet the film's hybrid identity made it difficult to categorize. It wasn't traditional horror, wasn't pure Western, wasn't quite romance. It existed between genres, and in 1987, that space wasn't yet appreciated. Only years later would critics reevaluate it, viewing its restraint as visionary rather than confusing. Sometimes a film's meaning isn't clear until the world catches up to it. Near Dark was one of those films. Fact 18. Cult films are often born from accidents misunderstood on release, then rediscovered by audiences who recognize something deeper beneath the surface. Near Dark followed this exact pattern. After stumbling theatrically, it found new life on late-night cable, quietly slipping into the consciousness of insomniacs, genre enthusiasts, and viewers who stumbled upon it without knowing what they were about to witness. Its mood, lonely, violent, atmospheric, left an imprint that lingered long after the credits rolled. VHS collectors played a major role in its resurrection. Copies circulated through video stores, horror conventions, and private exchanges, treated like rare artifacts. Early internet forums amplified the fascination. Discussions focused less on plot and more on feeling the drifting pace, the eerie quiet, the way the film seemed to exist in a space between genres. Fans described discovering it the way one discovers abandoned places, by accident, but with a sense of destiny. As Kathryn Bigelow's later films drew acclaim, audiences traced her evolution backward, discovering Near Dark as a raw, formative chapter in her career. Filmmakers began citing it as influence, pointing to its unwillingness to soften its world or explain itself. The film's journey wasn't about recovery, it was about recognition. Near Dark didn't adapt to the world eventually learned how to see it. Fact 19. The commercial fate of Near Dark was sealed long before audiences ever sat down to watch it. Its release collided with a cultural wave powered by The Lost Boys, a film that framed vampires as stylish, seductive, and drenched in neon glamour. Against that backdrop, Kathryn Bigelow's harsh and mournful vision felt like an unwelcome interruption. Viewers primed for youthful spectacle instead encountered a road-bound nightmare stitched together from dust, silence, and emotional ruin. The contrast left many stunned, unsure how to process a film that refused to follow any of the familiar rules. Distribution setbacks only made the situation worse. De Laurentiis Entertainment Group was already struggling financially, forcing them to limit prints, reduce marketing, and scatter the release across a handful of theaters. Some cities never screened the film at all. Others received it without advertisements or word-of-mouth momentum. The misleading poster campaign created further disconnect, attracting viewers who expected a glossy supernatural romance, not the feral, bruised story they were given. The reaction wasn't hatred but confusion. Some viewers left unsure of what they had just experienced. Others felt haunted but unable to articulate why. Near Dark didn't fit any mold, and because of that, it struggled to find a home in its own time. Ironically, the elements that doomed it commercially, its restraint, its grit, its refusal to flatter its audience, became the qualities that allowed it to outlive its era and emerge as a cult cornerstone. Fact 20. One of the most unexpected episodes in Near Dark's afterlife involved a corporate giant no one associated with the film's tone, Disney. During the late 2000s, as vampire media surged back into commercial relevance, the studio explored the idea of a remake that could capture a darker corner of the resurgence. On paper, the project seemed possible. In practice, it required sanding down everything that made the original unforgettable. Early internal notes proposed reshaping the narrative into something more accessible, less violence, more romance, a clearer origin for vampirism, and character arcs designed to align with mainstream expectations. The nomadic clan would lose their jagged unpredictability. The story's brutal intimacy would be softened. The ending would become triumph rather than tension. It was an attempt to polish a film defined by its rough edges. Once rumors leaked, the backlash was immediate. Horror fans questioned whether such a raw, feral film could ever survive corporate reimagining. Even industry insiders admitted privately that Near Dark's atmosphere couldn't coexist with sanitized expectations. The project dissolved quietly soon after. No press release, no announcement. It simply faded, a phantom of a remake that never belonged. Its brief flirtation with reinvention only emphasized what the original already proved. Near Dark is a film that resists domestication. Some stories cannot be retold without stripping away their soul. Bonus fact: there was one filming location that remained in the crew's memory long after everything else faded. A barren stretch of road known informally as the Cutoff. It looked unremarkable at first glance. A lonely highway curling through scrubland, flanked by decaying structures, and silence thick enough to feel physical. Yet the place carried a weight that no one could fully articulate. Local residents offered vague warnings, speaking as if the land itself kept secrets they preferred not to revisit. Only later did the production team discover the area's troubled history. Reports of disappearances had surfaced over the years, hitchhikers who never reached their destinations, a truck found abandoned with its engine still humming, belongings scattered, but no sign of the driver. Law enforcement officers familiar with the region described it in unsettling terms, calling it a patch of night that stays even in daylight. During filming, incidents accumulated quietly. A generator shut down without explanation, even though it had been checked minutes earlier. A camera that had worked flawlessly throughout the shoot froze the instant. Lance Henriksen stepped into its frame. One crew member claimed to see someone standing far beyond the lights, a motionless silhouette in the open dark. When others went to investigate, the space was empty, untouched, without footprints or signs of movement. No one openly claimed the area was haunted. No one confidently dismissed the idea either. Instead, the crew accepted the strange energy as part of the location's character, something ancient, indifferent, and quietly observing. In a film built on drifting shadows, predatory silence, and the uneasy boundary between survival and oblivion, The Cutoff did more than provide scenery. It lent the film a pulse, an echo of something the desert wasn't ready to explain. Let us know in the comments which detail from Near Dark stayed with you the longest, and which unanswered moment still feels like it's hiding something beneath the surface. Do you think its haunting power came from deliberate creative choices, or from the unpredictable forces surrounding its production? If there's another forgotten film or overlooked corner of cinema you want us to uncover next, we'd love to hear it. And if this exploration drew you deeper into the shadows, consider liking, subscribing, and joining us for the next descent into stories that were never meant to stay in the light.